Hey everyone, so quick reminder, today's lesson is 30 minutes long. You may need an additional 5 minutes or so to finish the practice, but if you stay on task, you hopefully shouldn't. So let's get right to it. So today's objective is to learn about parallel and perpendicular lines and to make the connections between those and what we're doing in class right now. So without further ado, let's get right to it. So parallel lines, you might be familiar with the topic, but they are lines that never intersect. And so we are now going to do a quick review. Here is an example of parallel lines on a graph. They're never intersecting. I want you to calculate the slope for both of them. So after we calculated the slope, I just counted for this. I didn't use the formula. We see that the slope is exactly the same. Well, again, slope is rise over run. Well, if both of them rise and run at the same speed, they're never going to intersect. So we can conclude that parallel lines have the same slope. So make sure that we add this into our notes. And so, if lines are parallel, they have the same slope. Now let's go on to perpendicular. So perpendicular, on the other hand, so it's like a rectangle. So we have a rectangle. All of these are perpendicular. They meet at 90-degree angles. So just like we did before, here is an example of perpendicular lines. Calculate the slope, and then we're going to see if there's a pattern. Now, perpendicular slopes are a little trickier. Now, notice that I left the slope of line A as -4/1. And I did that on purpose. I didn't reduce it to -4. I did it on purpose so we could see something. What we notice is the numerator in one is the denominator of the other. And the denominator of the first is the numerator of the second. And this one is positive, while the other one is negative. So we have a negative slope versus positive slope. And this is the pattern that we could end up seeing. So perpendicular lines have opposite, reciprocal slopes. And I'm going to quickly go over that to make sure we know. So again, make sure we add this to our notes. This one's a little trickier. Opposite means if one is negative, the other is positive. Reciprocal, well, we learned that before. That's changing the numerator and denominator. So let's look at this real quick. An example. M equals 2/3, okay? So the opposite is -2/3 because this is positive, so this is negative. The reciprocal is 3/2. We flip the numerator and the denominator. Opposite reciprocal, which is what we want, we do both. So this is positive, so we want a negative, and then we flip it. So this is the opposite reciprocal. One other example real quick, because I understand that this one's sometimes a little tricky. I'm going to push this down. Another example that we sometimes want to think about is what about, let's go -2. Well, the opposite is positive. So we want So opposite reciprocal of -2, it's a positive. Well, what I often do is I put this over 1 so I can see that it's a positive 1. So perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. All right. So here's our first example, and then we'll have some practice. So write an equation in slope-intercept form. Reminder, y equals mx plus b, that goes through the ordered pair 4, -3, and is perpendicular to y equals 2. Well, what we've seen in the past, in order to write an equation, we either need 2 ordered pairs, or we need 1 ordered pair and slope. Well, in this case, this is what we have. This is what we have. We have the ordered pair. That's 4, -3. And we have the slope. We know that the slope is perpendicular to this. So my slope is the opposite reciprocal of 2. The opposite of a positive is a negative. The reciprocal of 2, which is 2 over 1, is 1/2. So this question is saying write an equation using this information. Now I'm going to go to point slope and then transfer. So I'm going to say y minus y1, which is a +3 now, equals a -1/2 x minus 4. So I just plugged this point in and that slope. Y plus 3 equals -1/2 x plus 2 when I distribute. Subtract 3 from both sides. Y equals -1/2 x minus 1. Here is my equation that goes through 4, -3 and is perpendicular to that equation. Make sure you get this example in your notes before you go on to the practice problems. So here's practice problem number 1. So you try it first, and then we'll go over it. So we're given the ordered pair, and we're told we're parallel to this, which is just a way of saying that m equals 6, because parallel is the same slope. So we want point slope form. Well, that's y minus y1. Well, that's just a +3 now, equals m, that's 6. X minus x1, well, that's the -5, so +5. We're done. There's our first practice problem. Here's practice problem 2. You go first. So for this problem, again, we're asked point slope form. We want to go through this ordered pair. So I'm at least at this part, y minus 1 equals m x minus 8. I just need to figure out the m. Well, this equation right here is in point slope form. Notice I'm stressing that. It is in a form that gives me the slope. So according to this, my slope is 1/4. But since I am perpendicular, I need the opposite, so positive to negative, reciprocal, 1/4 to 4 over 1, which is just -4. Let's plug that in. And here is my equation. Let's go on to practice 3. Just as the others, you try first. So as this problem asked, we want to write an equation in slope-intercept form. We're given this ordered pair. And again, as I stressed before, this is in a form where we can pull out the slope. So we know that the slope is -5, and we're told that we're perpendicular to that. And since we are perpendicular to a slope of -5, I'm going to put that over 1. Our slope that we're going to use is a positive 1/5 because it's the opposite and reciprocal. So I'm going to go straight into slope-intercept form, but remember, you can use multiple ways to get here. So I currently have, here's my x, here's my y, there's my m. So I have a 7 equals 1/5 times 5 plus b. That's a 7 equals 1 plus b. So b is equivalent to 6. So my equation is y equals 1/5 x plus 6. So there's practice problem 3. Now, before we go on to practice problem 4 and 5, I have one more example for us to do together. Make sure you add it into your notes. The key difference here is what I've been saying. It must be in a form that we can pull out the slope. Here we are asked to write an equation, again, in slope-intercept form, goes through this and is parallel to this, which means we have the same slope. But 3x minus 2y equals 10 isn't in point slope form, isn't in slope-intercept form, which means we don't know what the slope is. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it into a form to determine the slope. So I'm going to go for slope-intercept form. I'm going to bring this 3x to the other side. I now have a -2y, don't forget that negative, equals a -3x and a positive 10. I'm going to divide the whole thing by -2, and I get y equals, well, -3, -2, that's a 3/2 x. 10 divided by -2, that's a -5. I'm now in slope-intercept form. So whereas before it meant nothing, I now know that my slope is 3. And since I'm parallel, I have the same slope. So now let's write my equation. So I'm going to go from point slope this time. So y minus, here's my x1, y1. So 4 equals 3/2, because this is now my m. X minus 2. I'm going to distribute, get a y minus 4 equals 3/2 x minus, that's a 2 over 1, so I get a 3. Add 4 to both sides, and I get y equals 3/2 x plus 1. So I now have slope-intercept form. So I have 2 practice problems for you to finish out this lesson. So here's practice problem 4. You try it first on your own. Remember, make sure the equation is in a form that allows you to know the slope. So just like the previous example, I can't use this fact until I put it into a form that I can know the slope. So I'm going to rewrite this. Now, going into point slope form doesn't make sense here. I just need to divide by 4 on both sides. And I get y equals, well, 2 divided by 4, that's a 1/2 x. 20 divided by 4, so -5. So I now know that the slope I'm looking at is 1/2. But because I'm perpendicular to it, the slope I want is a -2. This is the slope that I'm going to use. Now we're asked to do slope-intercept form and go through the point -6, 5. I'm going to go straight into slope-intercept form. So here's my x, here's my y. So I get a 5 is equal to m, -2, times x, -6, plus b. 5 equals 12 plus b. Subtract 12, get b equals -7. This allows me to write the equation y equals -2x minus 7. So let's go on to the last practice problem of the day. So you're asked to write an equation, point slope form, goes through the ordered pair -1, 5, and is parallel to this equation. So as we have been seeing, I first need to rewrite this equation into a form such as slope-intercept form. So I start by subtracting the 9x, 3y. You can say 30 minus 9x. I just put this first because it gets me directly into the form. Then I divide everything by 3, get y equals -3x plus 10. So I am parallel to this. So what information do I have? I have the point -1, -5, and I have that the m equals -3. Since we're asked point slope form, I can go straight to it. Y plus 5, because minus a negative, equals -3x plus 1. And there is my equation that goes through this point and is parallel to that equation. If you have any questions at any point along any of these, make sure that you've reached out to me and sent me an email. Bye guys, have a great day.